The brilliant red sun of Keldar cast long shadows across the central plaza of New Hope Colony. The normally bustling marketplace stood eerily silent, transformed overnight into an execution ground. 50,000 colonists from a dozen species knelt in ordered rows, their hands bound behind their backs with energy restraints that glowed faintly blue against the reddish light. Thomas Reed sat rigid in his quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel Concordia orbiting a neighboring moon. His blue eyes reflected the horror unfolding on the large display screen before him. As the human ambassador assigned to the Outer Rim territories, he had visited New Hope only 3 weeks earlier, shaking hands with local leaders and discussing their petition for independence from the Terrigan Empire. "This can't be happening," he whispered, his voice barely audible even in the silent room. The camera panned across the crowd, lingering on the faces of the condemned. Reed recognized many: merchants who had offered him local delicacies, teachers who had proudly shown him their schools, farmers who had invited him to break bread in their homes. Not insurgents, not terrorists, just people who had wanted freedom. A new figure appeared on screen. Tall and imposing in gleaming black armor adorned with crimson insignia, Grand Marshal Vex of the Terrigan Empire stepped onto the raised platform. His gray, scaled skin appeared almost metallic in the sunlight, and his 4 eyes, a trait of the Terrigan elite, surveyed the crowd with cold indifference. "People of the galaxy," Vex announced, his translator converting his harsh native tongue into the common galactic language. "Today, the Terrigan Empire delivers justice to those who would threaten our peace and security." Reed's hands clenched into fists. The Empire had manufactured evidence of an insurgency after negotiations for independence had begun showing promise. This was no justice. This was a message. "By the authority of Emperor Karn the Magnificent, I sentenced these rebels to death for crimes against the Imperial Order." Reed watched in helpless horror as the first row of prisoners was forced to their knees. Armored soldiers moved efficiently down the line, placing execution devices at the base of each prisoner's skull. The devices were designed to be painless, a small mercy that somehow made the atrocity even more disturbing in its clinical efficiency. The first wave of executions began with a subtle flash of light. 500 colonists slumped forward simultaneously, their lives ended in an instant. Then the next row, and the next. Reed couldn't look away, though every fiber of his being screamed to stop watching. He owed the victims that much: to witness, to remember. A drop of blood appeared where his fingernails dug into his palm. "Ambassador Reed," called a voice from the doorway. Reed didn't turn. His aide, Jack Morris, entered cautiously. "Sir, the Galactic Assembly is convening an emergency session. They're requesting your presence via quantum link." Reed nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the screen. "How many species are speaking out against this?" "Most have issued formal condemnations," Morris replied, his young face pale with shock. "The Altarians are proposing trade sanctions." Reed laughed bitterly. "Sanctions? 50,000 people are being murdered, and they offer sanctions." On screen, the execution had reached the halfway point. 25,000 dead. 25,000 more waiting for death, watching their friends and family fall before them. "Sir," Morris said gently, "the captain says we need to prepare to leave the system. The Empire is ordering all diplomatic vessels to withdraw." "They want no witnesses," Reed murmured. He finally turned from the screen, his face transformed. The professional diplomat was gone. In his place stood a man whose quiet rage seemed to fill the room. Morris took an involuntary step back. "Get me a direct channel to the assembly," Reed ordered, "not the scheduled session. Now." "Sir, protocol requires." "To hell with protocol," Reed snapped. 50,000 people are dying while politicians prepare statements. "I'm speaking now." As Morris hurried to establish the connection, Reed looked back at the screen one last time. In the crowd of the condemned, a small child, perhaps 6 years old, stood trembling beside her mother. Reed had met them both. The girl had given him a drawing of Earth, a planet she had never seen but had learned about in school. When the quantum link activated moments later, Reed stood before the virtual gathering of the Galactic Assembly with fire in his eyes and ice in his voice. I, Thomas Reed, representing Earth and all human colonies, bear witness to the massacre at New Hope, he began, his words cutting through the formal chatter of the assembly. And I vow before all species that justice will come for these crimes, no matter the cost. The galaxy would soon learn that when humans made vows, they kept them. 3 days after the massacre, the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Union buzzed with activity. Representatives from over 200 species filled the massive chamber, their voices creating a storm of sound that echoed off the towering crystal walls. Emergency sessions were rare, and this one had drawn a record attendance. Thomas Reed sat alone at the human delegation table. His superiors had ordered him to observe only, not to speak. The official Earth position was still being crafted by committees thousands of light years away. Reed had ignored the order. The Assembly recognizes Ambassador Telk of the Boron Collective, announced the speaker, a tall, willowy being whose translucent skin glowed with subtle bioluminescence. Telk, a squat amphibian with gleaming orange eyes, took the central platform. The collective extends its deepest sympathies for this unfortunate incident. We propose a formal censure of the Terrigan Empire's excessive actions and suggest a committee to study potential diplomatic responses. Reed's jaw tightened. 50,000 murders reduced to an unfortunate incident. A committee to study potential responses. He scanned the hall, noting the nodding heads and murmurs of agreement. No outrage, no demands for justice, just politics as usual. When the Terrigan delegation entered, the hall fell silent. 6 tall figures in ceremonial armor strode confidently to their section, led by Ambassador Vorn, brother to the very Grand Marshal who had overseen the executions. The Assembly recognizes Ambassador Vorn of the Terrigan Empire, the speaker announced. Vorn took the platform, his 4 eyes surveying the hall with contempt barely disguised as diplomacy. The Empire regrets that action was necessary to quell a violent insurgency. The evidence of planned attacks against Imperial citizens was overwhelming. We acted to prevent greater bloodshed. Lies. Reed had seen the colony. He had met the people. There had been no weapons, no insurgency, only petitions for independence and peaceful protests. The Empire considers this matter closed, Vorn concluded. Any further discussion constitutes interference in Imperial security matters. The threat was clear, and the hall fell into uncomfortable silence. The Terrigans controlled the largest military force in the quadrant. No single species wished to challenge them directly. Reed stood abruptly, ignoring the startled look from his aide. The Assembly recognizes Ambassador Reed of Earth, the speaker said, surprise evident in their voice. Reed walked slowly to the platform, feeling every eye in the hall upon him. He carried no notes. He needed none. 3 days ago, he began, his voice steady and clear. I watched as the Terrigan Empire murdered 50,000 innocent colonists. Not insurgents. Families. Children. Elders. People I had personally met and spoken with. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Such blunt language was rare in these halls. Ambassador Vorn claims they had evidence of planned violence. Reed continued, I challenge him to present this evidence now, before all assembled species. Vorn's upper eyes narrowed dangerously. Human, you overstep your authority. The Empire does not answer to lesser powers. Reed ignored him, turning to address the entire assembly. In human diplomatic tradition, there exists what we call a vow of resolution. It dates back to our earliest peace treaties on Earth. When normal channels fail, when justice seems impossible, a diplomat may take personal responsibility for seeing justice done. The murmurs grew louder. Many species were unfamiliar with this human custom. Today, Reed said, his voice gaining strength, I invoke this ancient tradition. Before all witnesses, I make the vow of resolution. I, Thomas Reed, personally vow that those responsible for the Kaldar massacre will face justice. This is not a threat of violence or war. This is a promise that truth will be revealed, that victims will be honored, and that those who ordered these killings will answer for their crimes." Ambassador Vorn laughed, the harsh sound cutting through the hall. How typically human. Emotional declarations instead of reason. What can one small human do against the Empire? Your own government has not authorized this display. Reed turned to face Vorn directly. "You're right about one thing, Ambassador. This is typically human. When we see a wrong, we cannot rest until it is made right. When we make a vow, we keep it." He paused. "And you have never faced a human who has made the vow of resolution." The hall erupted in chaotic discussion. Many ambassadors seemed confused, others concerned, a few intrigued. None understood what Reed had just set in motion. As Reed returned to his seat, his communication device buzzed urgently. A message from Earth. "Ambassador Reed, stand down immediately. You are relieved of duty." Reed silenced the device without reading further. They didn't understand. The vow transcended rank and position. It was personal now. At his table, Reed's aide leaned forward anxiously. "Sir, what have you done? The Terrigans never forget an insult, and Earth won't back this." Reed's eyes remained fixed on Ambassador Vorn, who was now engaged in heated discussion with his delegation. "I just made myself the most hunted man in the galaxy," Reed replied quietly, "and taken the first step toward justice." The refugee camp sprawled across the barren moon of Terrace IV like an open wound. Thousands of hastily constructed shelters housed those who had fled Keldar before or during the massacre. Reed pulled his hood lower as he moved through the crowded pathways, careful to keep his face hidden. 2 weeks had passed since his vow, and both Earth authorities and Terrigan agents were hunting him. The camp stank of fear and grief. Children with hollow eyes stared at him as he passed. Adults huddled in small groups, whispering stories of horror and loss. Reed had abandoned his diplomatic vessel and credentials, traveling on false documents aboard merchant ships. His formal clothing was replaced by simple, worn garments that helped him blend with the refugees. "You're looking for the woman who speaks for the survivors," said a voice behind him. Reed turned to find a thin man with 3 arms, a Neshtari, watching him closely. "How did you know?" Reed asked. The man's expression remained neutral. "Everyone who comes looking for truth seeks Lyra. Follow me, but stay quiet. Empire spies are everywhere." They wound through the maze of shelters until they reached a larger structure made of salvaged ship panels. 2 grim-faced refugees stood guard outside, armed with crude weapons. "He's here for Lyra," the Neshtari explained. One guard stepped forward, studying Reed carefully. "Show your face." Reed hesitated, then lowered his hood. Recognition flashed in the guard's eyes. "The human who made the vow," he whispered, then nodded and pushed aside the door panel. Inside, a dozen people of various species worked at makeshift stations, sorting information, recording testimonies, and organizing what appeared to be evidence. At the center stood a woman with pale blue skin and silver eyes, a Kaldar native. "Lyra," the guard announced, "the human diplomat is here." She turned, her expression hardening as she recognized Reed. Without warning, she crossed the room and struck him across the face. 50,000 dead, she hissed. "And you come weeks later. Where were you when they lined them up? Where was Earth? Where was your precious galactic union?" Reed didn't flinch or defend himself. "You're right. We failed. I failed." His simple admission seemed to surprise her. Lyra studied him for a long moment, then gestured toward a private alcove in the back. "My husband and daughter were in the 3rd row," she said when they were alone. "I watched from hiding. I was supposed to be there too, but I'd gone to get medicine for my daughter's fever." Her voice cracked. "Their fever saved my life." "I'm sorry," Reed said, the words woefully inadequate. "Sorry won't bring justice," Lyra replied. "But maybe this will." She activated a small projector, showing a holographic map of a facility deep in Terrigan territory. Before the massacre, several colonists worked as maintenance staff at this research station. They discovered something: biological experiments on living subjects. They brought evidence to colony leaders, who were preparing to present it to your Galactic Union. Reed's mind raced. The Empire killed 50,000 to cover up their research. 3 days before the massacre, every worker who had access to the facility was arrested. Then came the accusations of insurgency. Then the executions. Lyra's eyes burned with intensity. This wasn't just a message to independence movements. It was a cover-up. Reed studied the facility schematics. We need more evidence, something concrete that will force the assembly to act. We? Lyra asked skeptically. My vow wasn't empty words, Reed replied. But I can't do this alone. A commotion outside interrupted them. One of the guards burst in. Imperial Patrol. They're searching the camp section by section. Lyra quickly gathered data chips and a small device. There's a tunnel under the back panel. Go now. Reed hesitated. Come with me. Your knowledge is essential. Why should I trust you? Humans talk about justice, but you abandoned us before. I'm not representing Earth anymore, Reed said. I made the vow of resolution. In my culture, that's sacred. It means I will see this through or die trying. Something in his unwavering gaze must have convinced her. If you betray this cause, Lyra said as she gathered a few belongings, I'll kill you myself. They slipped through the hidden tunnel just as the sound of armored boots approached the shelter. Emerging in a different section of the camp, they moved quickly toward the small spaceport where Reed had arranged transportation. A shadow detached itself from a wall ahead. Reed pushed Lyra behind him, reaching for the hidden blaster in his coat. Ambassador Reed, said a low, gravelly voice. Or is it just Reed now? Either way, I've been waiting for you. The figure stepped into the light, revealing the insignia of a Terrigan commander on his armor. I have information about what really happened on Kaldar, the Terrigan said, and I want to help you expose it. Reed kept his blaster raised. Why would a Terrigan commander help me? The officer's 4 eyes reflected grim determination. Because I was there. And because not all of us are monsters. Commander Dorn, the Terrigan said, lowering his weapon as a gesture of trust. Former Imperial 1st Battalion. Reed kept his blaster aimed at the Terrigan's chest. The abandoned warehouse they'd chosen for this meeting smelled of rust and old fuel. Distant sounds of the spaceport filtered through cracked walls. Former. Lyra asked, her voice cold with suspicion. Convenient timing for your conscience to appear. Dorn's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a Terrigan expression of regret. I was stationed on Kaldar. I followed orders until... He paused. Until they brought the children. Reed studied the commander carefully. Terrigans were known for their rigid loyalty to the Empire. Defection was punishable by public execution of the defector and their entire family line. Whatever had driven Dorn to this point must have been powerful. Why should we trust you? Reed asked. Because I can get you what you need. Dorn removed a data chip from his armor and placed it on a crate between them. Security protocols, access codes, patrol schedules for the Kalar 7 research facility. Lyra snatched the chip, inserting it into her portable scanner. Her eyes widened as she reviewed the information. This is real, she admitted reluctantly. The massacre wasn't just about suppressing independence, Dorn continued. The Empire is developing a bioweapon that targets specific genetic markers. They can design a plague that kills one species while leaving others untouched. Reed finally lowered his weapon. That violates every treaty in the Galactic Compact. The Empire no longer cares about treaties, Dorn replied. Emperor Karn believes the time for Terrigan dominance has come. The executions were a test of the weapon in its early stage. Lyra's hands trembled. You're saying they used my people as lab animals? Dorn nodded grimly. The first version was designed to be quick, painless. Future versions will not be. Reed paced the small space, his mind racing. The evidence must be at this research facility. If we can retrieve it. Suicide. Dorn interrupted. The facility is guarded by elite troops and automated defense systems. 3 beings couldn't possibly. We won't be 3 for long, Reed said with unexpected confidence. 2 days later, their small ship approached the neutral trading post of Vega Station. Once a mining operation, it had evolved into a haven for those avoiding Imperial attention. Reed had arranged a meeting with potential allies through old diplomatic contacts who still trusted him despite his rogue status. "This is foolish," Lyra said as they walked through the crowded marketplace. "No species will risk Terrigan wrath based on promises and theories." "You underestimate the power of human diplomacy," Reed replied. "Human diplomacy failed 50,000 people on Kaldor," she shot back. Reed stopped walking. "Yes, it did. Official diplomacy failed because it was bound by protocols and politics. But this," he gestured to himself, "to their mission. This is human diplomacy in its purest form. Direct, honest, driven by conviction rather than convenience." They entered a private meeting room above a busy tavern. Representatives from 7 minor species waited inside. None were powerful enough to challenge the Empire alone, but together. Ambassador Reed began the Morrican delegate, her feathered crest rising in agitation. "My government cannot officially support your cause." "None of our governments can," added the Tellarite representative. "The Empire would crush us." Reed nodded. "I'm not asking for official support. I'm asking you as individuals who believe in justice to help us expose a truth that threatens all our peoples." For the next hour, Reed laid out everything they had learned. He spoke not with the measured tones of a diplomat, but with the passion of someone who had witnessed atrocity and refused to look away. He showed them Dorn's evidence. He had Lyra tell her story. When he finished, silence filled the room. "If what you say is true," the Vexian delegate said slowly, "the Empire will not stop with one massacre." "They won't," Dorn confirmed. "My people believe in strength. If the galaxy shows weakness now, it invites more bloodshed." "What exactly do you need from us?" asked the Morrican. Reed smiled for the first time in weeks. "Ships, supplies, technical expertise, and most importantly, your trust." The delegates exchanged looks. "My family owns a small fleet of cargo vessels," offered the Tellarite. "Officially, they would be reported stolen." "I can provide stealth field generators," added the Vexian. One by one, they committed resources, not as representatives of their governments, but as individuals unwilling to stand by while evil went unchallenged. As they left the meeting, Lyra looked at Reed with newfound respect. "I didn't think you could do it." "When humans make a vow," Reed replied, "we find a way to keep it." Behind them, Dorn watched with all 4 eyes, his expression unreadable. "The Empire has never faced a coalition formed like this, not through treaties or threats, but through conviction." He paused. "Perhaps they should be afraid." The Kalar 7 research facility hung in space like a dark star, its black metal surface absorbing rather than reflecting light. 3 security rings surrounded it, automated defense platforms, patrol ships, and finally, a heavy energy shield. For most, it would be impossible to breach. But Reed was counting on having something the Empire never expected: a Terrigan commander's access codes. "Final equipment check," Reed said, securing the last piece of his infiltration suit. The small team gathered in the cargo hold of what appeared to be an ordinary Terrigan supply vessel, one of Commander Dorn's contributions to their plan. Lyra adjusted her breathing apparatus. Unlike the others, her Kaldar physiology required special equipment to survive inside the facility's atmosphere, which was calibrated for Terrigan comfort. "Remember," Dorn said, his voice tense, "my access will get us through the first 2 security checkpoints. After that, we have exactly 12 minutes to reach the central data core before the system flags the anomaly." Reed nodded. 12 minutes to get in, 5 minutes to extract the data, 15 minutes to get out. The supply ships leave at exactly that interval. Their small team included 3 others. Vex, a Morrican technology expert who could crack the facility's data encryption. Tala, a former security specialist who knew Imperial facility layouts. And Nisk, a pilot who would extract them if everything went wrong. "If we're not back in 30 minutes, Reed told Nisk, leave without us and get the data to the safe location we discussed." The ship docked smoothly at the facility's supply port. Dorn transmitted his security codes, and the automated system granted them entry without question. So far, the Empire didn't know one of their commanders had defected. "Masks on," Reed ordered as they approached the first interior checkpoint. The team donned face-covering helmets designed to mimic Terrigan maintenance workers. Dorn, in his commander's armor, led them through the checkpoint with the confidence of someone who belonged there. "Routine inspection of Sector 7 environmental systems," he told the guard, transmitting the authorization codes from his armor. The guard's 4 eyes scanned them briefly before weaving them through. "Hurry up. The director is inspecting that sector in 2 hours." Once past the checkpoint, they moved quickly through utility corridors, avoiding the main passages where security cameras would be watching. Vex consulted a small holographic map as they navigated the labyrinth. "The central data core is 3 levels down," he whispered. "We need to access lift tube B7. They reached the lift without incident, but as the doors opened, 2 Terrigan scientists stood inside. Reed tensed, his hand moving toward the concealed weapon at his side. Dorn stepped forward smoothly. "This lift is now restricted. Security Protocol 5 Alpha." The scientists looked confused. "We weren't informed." "Do you question a commander's orders?" Dorn growled, his hand resting visibly on his sidearm. The scientists quickly backed away, choosing another route. As the lift doors closed, Lyra let out a breath. "That was close." "Too close," Dorn agreed. "Our window is shrinking." The lift descended rapidly to the research levels. When the doors opened, the true nature of the facility became apparent. Through transparent walls, they could see laboratories where scientists worked on biological samples. In one room, what appeared to be test subjects, beings of various species, lay unconscious on examination tables. "Monsters," Lyra whispered, her hands trembling with rage. "Focus," Reed said gently. "Justice comes after evidence." They moved swiftly toward the central core, following Vex's directions. The final security door required both Dorn's command codes and a biometric scan. "This is where it gets complicated," Dorn said. "The scanner will recognize me, but it will also log my presence. The moment I use it, security will be alerted that I'm in a restricted area." "How long until they respond?" Reed asked. 3 minutes, maybe 4 if we're lucky. Reed nodded. "Then we work faster." Dorn placed his hand on the scanner. The door hissed open, revealing a circular room dominated by a massive computer core glowing with blue light. Vex rushed to the main terminal. "Cover me. This will take exactly 2 minutes." As Vex worked, Reed and the others stood guard. Tala monitored security channels through a small device on her wrist. "Security alert initiated," she reported tensely. "They're dispatching a team to investigate." Vex's fingers flew across the interface. "Almost there. The encryption is complex, but got it." He inserted a specialized data crystal, designed to copy massive amounts of information in seconds. A harsh alarm suddenly blared throughout the facility. "They've spotted us," Dorn warned. "We need to move now." Vex grabbed the crystal. "I've got everything. Research logs, test results, and authorization records showing who ordered the Kaldar massacre." They rushed toward the exit, but as they reached the door, a security team appeared at the far end of the corridor. Blaster fire erupted around them. "This way," Tala shouted, pointing to a maintenance shaft. They crawled through narrow passages, the sounds of pursuit growing louder behind them. When they emerged 2 levels up, they were close to the docking bay. but separated from it by a wide open area patrolled by security. "We'll never make it across undetected," Tala said. Reed studied the layout quickly. "We don't all need to make it. Lyra, take the data crystal. The rest of us will create a diversion." Before she could protest, security forces burst into the corridor behind them. In the chaos that followed, Reed pushed Lyra toward a different passage. "Go, get the evidence to the assembly." As Lyra escaped with the precious data, Reed turned to face the approaching guards, ready to sacrifice everything to keep his vow. The Grand Assembly Hall had never been so crowded. Representatives from every known species packed the chamber, their usual formality replaced by tense anticipation. News of Reed's capture during the Kalar 7 raid had spread through diplomatic channels, along with rumors of evidence that could bring down the Terrigan Empire. At the center of the hall, surrounded by 6 armed guards, stood Thomas Reed. His face bore fresh bruises, his left arm hung at an odd angle, and his once neat appearance was now ragged from 2 weeks in imperial custody. Yet his eyes remained clear and determined. "This emergency session will come to order," announced the speaker, struggling to be heard over the murmurs. "The assembly recognizes Ambassador Vorn of the Terrigan Empire." Vorn strode to the platform, his posture radiating confidence. "Esteemed representatives, we gather today to witness justice. The human Thomas Reed stands accused of terrorism against the Empire. He infiltrated a secure Imperial facility, caused the deaths of 12 loyal soldiers, and stole classified information. The Empire demands his formal extradition for punishment." The hall erupted in voices, some supporting the demand, others protesting. "The accused may speak," the speaker said when quiet returned. The guards roughly pushed Reed forward. He stumbled but caught himself, straightening as much as his injuries allowed. "I stand before you not as a representative of Earth, but as a witness to atrocity," Reed began, his voice hoarse but steady. "2 months ago, I made a vow to bring justice for 50,000 murdered colonists. Today, I fulfill that promise." He looked directly at Vorn. "The Empire claims I stole information. I did. Information they desperately wanted to hide." "Baseless accusations," Vorn interrupted. "The human has no evidence, only words." The main doors of the hall burst open. Lyra entered, flanked by representatives from 7 minor worlds. She carried a small projection device. "I have the evidence," she announced. The hall fell silent as she approached the center. Guards moved to intercept her, but representatives from multiple species stood to block their path. "Let her present her findings," demanded the Altarian delegate, surprising many with this show of support. Lyra activated the device. Holographic displays appeared throughout the hall, showing laboratory footage, research notes, and command authorizations. The evidence was undeniable. The massacre had been ordered to cover up illegal bioweapon development, targeting specific species' genetic markers. Most damning was the final document, the execution order for Kaldar, bearing the imperial seal and signature of Emperor Karn himself. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Vorn seemed momentarily stunned. Reed's voice cut through the silence. 50,000 people died not because they threatened imperial security, but because they discovered the truth. The Empire is developing weapons to selectively exterminate species it deems problematic. He swept his gaze across the assembled delegates. Today, it was the Kaldar colonists. Tomorrow, it could be any of your people. Vorn recovered quickly. "These documents are forgeries. The Empire rejects." A new voice interrupted, deep, resonant, and unmistakably Terrigan. "They are not forgeries." All eyes turned to the entrance as Emperor Karn himself entered the hall, surrounded by his elite guard. The Emperor rarely left Terrigan's face and never attended assembly sessions. His presence sent shockwaves through the gathering. Karn moved toward the center, his ornate armor gleaming under the lights. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with all 4 eyes focused intently, he was an intimidating presence. "Emperor Karn," the speaker said, clearly flustered. The Assembly acknowledges your unexpected presence. I come to address these accusations directly, Karn said. His guards formed a protective circle around him as he faced Reed. You have caused much trouble, human. And you have caused much death, Emperor, Reed replied without fear. The tension in the hall was unbearable. Many expected the Emperor to order Reed's immediate execution. Instead, Karn surprised everyone. The strength of the Empire has always been our willingness to eliminate threats before they grow dangerous. The research at Kalar 7 was meant to protect our people. By developing the means to commit genocide, Reed asked. By ensuring our survival in a hostile galaxy, Karn countered. Every species here would do the same if they had the courage and capability. Representatives began shouting denials, the hall descending into chaos until the speaker called for order. When quiet returned, Reed spoke again, his voice somehow carrying more authority than the Emperor's despite his battered condition. You're wrong, Emperor Karn. True strength isn't found in the ability to destroy others. It's found in the courage to build together. He gestured to the delegates around them. The galaxy doesn't need to be a zero-sum game where your survival means others must die. Reed took a step closer to Karn, causing the guards to raise their weapons. I didn't come here seeking revenge, Reed continued. I came seeking justice. There's a difference. Revenge would demand your death and the fall of your empire. Justice demands accountability, reform, and restitution for the victims. The Emperor studied Reed with all four eyes. You stand before me injured, powerless, yet you speak as if offering terms. Typical human arrogance. Not arrogance, Reed replied. Hope. Hope that even the Terrigan Empire can choose a better path forward. As they faced each other, the mighty Emperor and the wounded diplomat, the future of the galaxy hung in the balance. 1 year after the confrontation in the Assembly Hall, Thomas Reed stood at the edge of New Hope Memorial Garden on Kaldar. The once barren execution ground had been transformed into a place of beauty and remembrance. 50,000 trees, one for each victim, surrounded a simple monument of polished black stone where names were etched in golden script. Reed's physical injuries had healed, though he still walked with a slight limp. The diplomatic uniform he wore now carried different insignia, no longer representing Earth alone, but the newly formed Interspecies Justice Council. Quite a change from when we first met, said a familiar voice. Reed turned to see Lyra approaching. Her silver eyes reflected the setting sun, and she wore the formal attire of Kaldar's provisional government. I wasn't sure you'd come to the ceremony, Reed said. Lyra stood beside him, looking out over the memorial. I almost didn't. Some wounds never fully heal. No, Reed agreed quietly. But justice helps. The path behind them, filled with delegates arriving for the 1-year commemoration, representatives from dozens of species moved respectfully through the garden, many leaving small tokens at the base of the monument. Most surprising to many observers was the Terrigan delegation, not led by Ambassador Vorn, who had been one of the first to stand trial, but by Commander Dorn. His new title, Governor of Reformed Territories, reflected the dramatic changes within the Empire. The reformers actually kept their promises, Lyra remarked, watching Dorn direct his staff to place ceremonial offerings at the monument. Reed nodded. The Empire's civil war lasted only 3 months, but it changed everything. The confrontation in the Assembly Hall had been merely the beginning. When Emperor Karn had refused to acknowledge the evidence, military commanders within the Empire itself had revolted, led by those who had long opposed the bioweapon program, but had been silenced by fear. The ensuing conflict had been brief but decisive. Karn and his most loyal supporters had been overthrown, with a council of reformers taking control. Their first action had been to surrender those responsible for the Kaldar massacre to the newly formed Galactic Tribunal. Ambassador Reed called a voice. A young Terrigan approached, wearing the simple uniform of a diplomatic aide. Governor Dorn requests your presence at the main ceremony. Reed followed the aide to a raised platform where representatives would speak to the gathered crowd. Dorn greeted him with the traditional Terrigan salute, once a gesture of military authority, now transformed into a symbol of mutual respect. The survivors asked specifically that you speak first, Dorn said. They believe your vow made today possible. Reed took his place at the podium and looked out over the thousands who had gathered, families of victims, survivors, diplomats, and ordinary citizens from across the galaxy who had traveled to witness this moment. 1 year ago, Reed began, 50,000 lives were taken in an act of unimaginable cruelty. We gather today not only to honor their memory, but to celebrate what their sacrifice ultimately achieved. He gestured to the representatives seated behind him. The Kaldar Accords, signed yesterday by 173 species, including the reformed Terrigan Empire, outlaw bioweapons research and establish the strongest protections for civilian populations in our history. A murmur of approval moved through the crowd. Justice is not vengeance, Reed continued. Justice is accountability, reform, and the commitment to a better future. The 26 architects of the massacre have faced trial. The Empire has paid reparations to victims' families. And most importantly, the truth has been told. As Reed spoke, a small ship descended from the clouds above. It carried the final piece of the memorial, a clear crystal sphere containing soil from the homeworlds of all 50 species who had lost citizens in the massacre. This memorial will stand as eternal testimony that justice may be delayed, but it will not be denied. That a single voice raised in truth can eventually move worlds. After the ceremony, as twilight settled over the garden, Reed found himself alone again at the monument. He traced his fingers over the names, remembering faces he had met during his diplomatic visits before the massacre. You kept your vow, said Lyra, joining him once more. What will you do now? Reed looked up at the stars appearing in the darkening sky. There are other injustices in the galaxy, other voices that need to be heard. And will you make more vows? She asked. Reed smiled slightly. One was enough to show what's possible when we refuse to accept that might makes right, when we insist that every life matters. In the distance, the lights of New Hope City glowed brightly. The colony had been rebuilt, now thriving with a diverse population, including, surprisingly, many Terrigan civilians who had chosen to live under the new, more open government. The diplomats are calling it the human approach to justice, Lyra said with a hint of amusement, finding a way forward that punishes wrongdoing but allows for redemption. Maybe that's the true strength we contribute to the galactic community, Reed replied. Not weapons or technology, but our stubborn insistence that justice and mercy can exist together. As they walked together through the garden of 50,000 trees, each one representing a life lost and now honored, Reed felt the weight of his vow finally lift. He had promised justice, and justice had been done. Not perfect justice. No justice ever could be, but enough to begin healing, enough to ensure the dead had not been forgotten, enough to protect the future. And for now, that was enough.